The worst time to try and think rationally about what you want or not want is when you've just been told that you've got this life-limiting illness. I don't want to be kept alive any longer than necessary if that's my fate. When are we going to allow ourselves to just naturally die? Dying isn't just one moment in time, it's a process. Getting onto a palliative care program can actually extend your life. Living longer is not the be-all and end-all. I think that's one of the things that people tend to make the mistake when they keep on accepting treatment. Oh, you'll get another 3 months. But what does that 3 months actually look like?
Don't Be Caught Dead, the show bringing stories of death back to life. Here's your host, Catherine Ashton.
Today I'm speaking with Rose Sexton. Rose has over 40 years of nursing experience and postgraduate qualifications in palliative care. Rose has a great passion for supporting those at end of life. She holds a deep desire to open up conversations around death, dying, and end of life issues, believing that this contains enormous possibilities for living more fully and richly. Rose has also had recent personal experiences providing end-of-life support and understands the challenges, nuances, and opportunities in this space. She has a long history in the performing arts, including music and theatre, and is a firm believer in its transformative power. Rose has spent the past few years holding regular workshops, courses, and events in her local area and promoting conversations around death and dying, and is a qualified and experienced advanced care planner. In 2024, the Good to Go project was established as a way to reshape the narrative around death, dying, loss, and grief in their local region. There is now a collective of like-minded individuals who have joined Rose and her business partner Nicole as the Good to Go Collective, comprising of end-of-life doulas, funeral directors, and various other people who all hold a passion for this cause. Rose lives and works in Wangaratta in northeast Victoria, both in community palliative care and as a palliative care educator for aged care and disability support workers. Thank you so much for being with us today, Rose.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for asking me. It's great to be here.
So tell me, when you say a qualified advanced care planner, what does that mean?
Well, back probably about 20 years ago, I think the advanced care planning sort of movement started. It's an international sort of push to get people talking about the kind of medical treatments they would like or would not want, and how the kind of states they'd end up in or would not want to end up in. So there was training around probably 10 years ago or more, 15 years ago, from the original people who sort of established it in Australia. And so I did all those trainings, and that's how I got to be a qualified advanced care planner. But it's basically, I've got a lot of experience talking to people about, it's not so much medical treatments. I think we shy away from that these days. It's more about what your values are and what matters to you, what gets you out of bed in the morning, what brings you joy, and to make sure that medical treatments that are made on your behalf if you can't make them for yourself, are in line with those values. Yeah, I think that's what advanced care planning is really trying to do, is to make sure that people get the care that they would choose for themselves if they had the opportunity to do that. But the statistics say that I think it's somewhere between 50 to 80% of people at some point during an illness will not have the capacity to make those decisions, particularly if it's a serious illness, and that's when, the rubber meets the road and it really matters. You can either bring somebody back, choose to treat and means that they're going to continue living, but that living is vastly different to what they were doing beforehand, and they could end up, with a significant functional loss. You could end up needing care, full-time care, and there's a lot of people who would say that they don't want that. Yeah, so that's the sort of the heart of advanced care planning, is to have, and really it doesn't need a document at the end of it. I think that people get sort of head up about that, and I think healthcare professionals can be a little bit, what's the word, bossy about getting someone to write everything down. You don't have to write it down. The most important thing you can do is think about what you want and appoint someone to speak on your behalf, and then talk to that person about what you want so that they know. Don't just go ahead and say, oh, I've appointed, my third daughter, but no, I'm not going to tell her what I want. She's just got to be burdened with the need to choose everything for me, but I haven't told her what I want.
And how, because obviously the space that you work in palliative care and with end of life planning, you would have seen many examples of when it's done well and when it's done not so well.
Yes. Yeah. A lot of people and a lot of health professionals, particularly, say, nurses, think that it's the doctor's job. But the whole process of advanced care planning should take 2 to 3 hours over the space of, 3 or 4 weeks, or, however long it takes, really. It's not something you really can rush. And doctors don't have time. They don't have those 3 hours to spend coming back and having a chat with people, because there's very little compensation available for them. On the MBS, there's only, I'm not too sure of my facts here, but I think there's only 1 or 2 opportunities for doctors to actually claim that time.
Is that through the Medicare rebate scheme?
Yeah, and which
Yep.
is what doctors are all about. And it's usually a GP that has to do this. You won't get a specialist doing an advanced care plan with you. Because it's, my time is worth far more than anybody could possibly pay for it.
But that is the challenge of the system, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because when you think about like someone who, and I'm sure you can give better examples than what I can, Rose, but I'm thinking about the people that I've spoken to, and they generally go to their GP because they may have some sort of symptoms of what they're experiencing. The GP generally always refers them to a specialist to actually then have a condition diagnosed. And if that diagnosis is a life-limiting illness, that can then be a challenge because, in that process, at that point in time, no one's spoken to them about what their options are or their plans are at
Mm,
this point, have they?
yeah. I mean, that's the worst time to start doing your advanced care plan. The best time to do it is when there's nothing wrong with you, or you might have some vague illness, kicking along in the background that might point you in the direction of what could possibly happen. Say if you've got a history of high blood pressure or any sort of cardiac issues, you might think, well, a stroke is possibly one thing that might happen to me. And so that's when you sort of, you make this plan and you think, okay, well, if I had a stroke, I wouldn't want this outcome, so don't treat me if it's so dense that I'm going to need full-time care and you'll have to put me in a nursing home. But yeah, the worst time to try and think rationally about what you want or not want is when you've just been told that you've got this life-limiting illness, because your body's already in shock and your mind is frozen. And I reckon everyone should have an advanced care plan, because none of us know what's coming for us, and any of us could end up in ICU at any stage and be lying in the bed, and the doctors are turning to the family and saying, well, what do you want us to do? What do you think they would want us to do? And the family are all staring at each other saying, I don't know, we never talked about this. I don't know. And so the default, of course, for the family, 95% of the time, they're going to say treat, because I don't want to be the one responsible for turning off the machines if that's not what they wanted. So you're going to always have this over treatment. And the advanced care planning sort of movement has sprung from the intensive care community, not so much the palliative care. People will think, oh, I'm not ready for that. You don't know. Everybody should have an advanced care plan. Now, it's easier to say, I suppose, when you're younger, the general sort of gist would be, oh yeah, treat everything. But in these catastrophic times, accidents and things where there is a possibility that we can save them, and we'll try and bring them back, and then we'll just see what happens. But they might end up like paralysed or relegated to a wheelchair for the rest of their life. Now, there's a lot of people who would all be very happy with that and be still, yes, I want to live. And there's a lot of reasons why people would want to live if they've got children or that sort of thing. But again, you don't know unless you've asked them for yourself and you've really thought about it yourself and say, is that limitation or that dysfunction something that I'd be happy with, that I could tolerate. And it's different for everybody. And that's the problem. You can't just assume that, oh, well, of course, everybody would be happy to live in a wheelchair, or no one would, choose that if they had the choice. So we'll just make the choice for them.
And what I found when I was completing the advanced care plan with my mum over Christmas, she's 86, she's in very good health, she's going to the gym 3 days a week, she's really good, but the thing that I found that I really had to talk through with her is also like using terms such as communicate. Well, if I can communicate, that's fine. I'm like, but what does communicate mean to you? So I really had to break it down. So it can be quite challenging, can't it?
Yeah, and I've certainly seen some poor examples of advanced care planning, usually done by someone who didn't have time or didn't really understand the brief. And particularly in Victoria, there's boxes that you fill out, and one of them is what matters most to me. And I've seen things like family, gardening, reading. You think, that tells us nothing, really.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
family, like, again, 95% of people would say that family is important, but what is it about family that's important to you? What is it about gardening? What does being able to get out in the garden mean to you? Why does it bring you joy? It's not because, it's so nebulous and so lacking in information that really doesn't tell us anything. What I try and tell people is this document is the 3D version of you that stands up in the room when you're in the bed and you can't speak for yourself. Everyone's looking to this document to guide them as to what to do next. And if you've just put this is, you relegated yourself to all that matters to me is family, gardening, and reading. We're all, we're three-dimensional people. We've got all these things that we love and don't like, and and I always say, look, write a one pager at the end of attach that to your plan and say, this is what I've done in my life and what I've experienced and what I've seen. What experiences of good dying have you seen, and what bad deaths have you seen that make you want the sort of things that you're putting in this plan? Sort of gives that all that background. I mean, I usually talk about my own plan, which is fairly radical.
Well, now you've got me intrigued, Rose. You have to tell us, can you?
Yes.
Are you comfortable to share?
Yes, yes. I've got a very low tolerance for any sort of dysfunction. And my kids all know this. And I have said that, for example, if I develop dementia and I haven't been able to do anything about sort of exiting prior, and I'm ending up in a nursing home or needing all this care, I don't want any medications. Don't give me any medications. And I certainly don't want like a feeding tube or those kind of things. So no interventions, certainly no CPR, and even feeding me. So because I've worked in a nursing home for years and years, and I have seen people being kept alive for absolutely no purpose and no quality of life. We're just keeping the body alive, and that's all we're doing. Um, I don't want people to, here's the airplane and, bring the spoon to my mouth. Certainly put the food in front of me. I'm more than happy to pick at food, but I don't want to be fed, because that is such a primal thing, look it's just this automatic thing that you just keep on feeding the body and it'll just keep on taking food. And I don't want that. I don't want to be kept alive any longer than is necessary if that's my fate. So you've got to think about all these things and give the background. And so my background is I've worked in nursing for 40 years. I've seen some terrible deaths and terrible examples of people being kept alive beyond what was sort of beyond the natural order of things. We prop our bodies up with medications and injections and surgeries and treatments, and the body is trying its best to say, I've had it. I'm done here. No, we can stop this. We can give you another pill. And so then you end up with people in nursing homes that have like 3 pages of medications and all interacting with each other. And it's like, when are we going to allow ourselves to just naturally die? Yes. Yeah, that's my manifesto. Yeah.
Rose, it was interesting that you mentioned that when you were going into the detail about what you're comfortable with your care, the key thing that sticks out for me is that you said, I had told my kids.
Yes.
So how does one start those conversations with loved ones?
Yeah, I find this. I mean, it's not a problem for me. My kids are used to it. I've been
I
talking
could
about this.
imagine.
Yeah, they just roll their eyes. I'm sure they appreciate it, and I hear from a lot of people, older people that I'm trying to do advanced care planning with, and I say, well, you need to get your family together and start thinking about it, looking at the document, talking about it together, having like a kitchen table conversation. And a lot of people say their kids don't want to have a bar of it because they can't bear the thought. So it's tricky, and that's frustrating because really it's the only thing that we know is going to happen. Your parents are older, and this is the natural order of things: is your parents will die before you. Well, I mean, you don't want the opposite. You don't want to die before your parent and put your parent through that. So we know our parents have to die, and it's just it's annoyingly frustrating for that children won't actually come to this. And this is why I do what I do, to try and get people talking about death and dying, and to turn around and face it, and to see that it's not as this big scary tiger that's chasing you, and that it's something we have to face. We just have to. Like, what's the alternative? You're just going to stick your head in the sand and then be absolutely devastated and be left with questions and, oh, why didn't I wish I'd talked to my mum about this before she died, and why didn't I? All these regrets, and it's just so unnecessary.
And it's quite invalidating, isn't it? Because you're saying, I
Mm.
don't want to hear what your wishes and your thoughts are.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a very selfish stance to take for children. I mean, this is part of the society we live in, and again, that's why I do what I do. The last 120 years or so has really robbed us culturally in the West of agency over death and dying. The advances in medical science have absolutely revolutionised the average age of dying, but in a way, in a big way, we now believe that we're all entitled to live this big, fulsome life and die in our sleep when we're 85. But that's statistically, that's not correct. And so anything less than that is automatically seen as a tragedy. But it's not. It's just, this is how life is. I mean, it's sad. It's awful when someone dies, apparently early, but that's the way it is. And if we're not prepared for it, we can end up being sort of haunted by deaths that came too sort of too early, instead of just embracing the fact that death is a part of life. And if we live with that knowledge every day, then we can live more fully, because then now our lives are complete, instead of life with this constant shadow of death, but we're always pushing it over to the side and out of the way. Let's not think about that. And it means that there's this whole area of our lives, it's like this shadow in our lives that's preventing us. We're constantly running away from this shadowy area. Oh, don't go over there, that's too scary. And so a lot of the time we're scrambling to keep away from it. Whereas if we say, oh, death, come in, let's have a chat. Okay, I know you're there. I accept that this is part of what life is. And so, getting in an aeroplane, taking off, thinking, well, this could be it. Is that okay? Yes. And I mean, that's what I try and do. Yesterday I was about to get a tattoo, but my tattooist had to go to a school play, and I said, "You've got to go. You've got to be there at those moments." Yeah. And my tattoo is a reminder. It's a whole lot of symbolism sort of joined in together, but it's going to be a daily reminder for me that I'm going to die. And I try and remember that every day. And because then I carry with me, if that's the possibility that I could die today, I don't know. If I go out on the roads, anyone who's in a car can die at any time.
The statistics are higher, and having been one of those statistics, I can tell you, you go off to work one day, you think that's just going to be a normal day, and
Mm,
then your life changes completely. So it can happen. I
yes.
was I was in my early 40s when that happened, and I will be very interested to see what your tattoo looks like, Rose, when you get it. But it does remind us that Latin saying of memento mori, one day you will
That's
die.
it.
And it's something that we've embraced with death. Like, I know when I had my son, and that was over 21 years ago now, we were asked to do a 8-week course leading up to the birth. We were encouraged by the healthcare professionals to do that. We were encouraged to write our birth plan. Not everyone has children.
No.
So it's crazy that we aren't as prepared in our healthcare system or in society to
Yeah.
prepare for the one thing that we're all going to experience.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. And we plan for everything else in our lives. And we're taught in kindergarten to clean up after ourselves. And yet when it comes to death and dying and being dead and all the stuff that comes after you're dead, we seem to think that it's all just going to magically sort itself out and we'll get exactly what we wanted. Or we don't even think about what we want, but we know when we're not getting what we want, when we're not getting it, or we're getting something other than what we wanted. It makes no sense. Yeah, like it's almost irresponsible not to have this stuff done, because to leave it up to fate or whoever comes along means that you're putting that burden of decision making on them, and that can sort of follow somebody for the rest of their lives. That second guessing and the guilt, did they do the right thing? And so, as I said, most of the time people will default to do everything because, we haven't talked about it, so I don't want to be the one that pulls the plug, well, literally or figuratively.
And even like when our friend died unexpectedly and his 2 adult children, they'd never had the conversation about whether he wanted to be buried or cremated. So, even those like logistical decisions to be made after, someone's died as well, and let alone the administration. And I'd be interested in your thoughts in what I find when I talk to people about death. It's never actually about death. It's either the lead up to the death or the impact on the loved ones after someone's died.
Mm.
It is never about death itself because technically no one can talk about that that's been there,
That's right.
like not effectively.
Yeah.
So what I always find is it's always about the living and the choices that you want to be, whether there's someone to speak on your behalf, if you can no longer act and speak yourself, such as what you've been talking about with the advanced care plan or advanced care directive here in Victoria. But, it is never about the death itself. Is that what you find, Rose?
Yes, it's, I guess, because for most of the time when you're talking to people about this stuff, unless they are actually becoming more and more unwell, say if they're on the palliative care program and their death is sort of imminent, weeks or days away. But even then, people tend not to want to know what that's going to look like. It's interesting because I would want to know. I mean, and now with all of my experience, I do know what to expect on the whole. But yeah, people are more concerned about how things are going to look for the people that are caring for them. They don't want to be a burden. I hear that a lot. I don't want to be a burden. I'm happy to, go into a nursing home when we talk about, where would you like to die? And that's another thing that I'd like to talk about. I don't know, now or
Yeah,
later.
please go. We can go wherever you want to go, Rose.
Okay. Well, I think the idea of reciprocity, I talk about this quite a bit with patients that I see in community palliative care. When they say, oh, I don't want to be a burden, I don't want to bother, oh, my family's busy enough. This concept of reciprocity, where people who have had the opportunity to care for somebody actually get so much out of it. And so that's what I tell people. I say, look, you're doing them a favour by letting them help you and taking care of you. And I speak from my personal experience. Taking care of my partner was a high point in my life. I know it sounds weird. I was euphoric after he died. It was quite strange. And we had talked about it. He was quite open-eyed about all of this stuff. He knew what he wanted and what he didn't want. And me being a nurse, I was just so elated that I could give him exactly what he wanted. And I knew, I brought all of my skills, everything. It felt like my whole life had been leading up to that point of taking care of him. And it was just, yeah, it was just the most rewarding experience, or one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. So I always encourage people to think about, don't sort of shut down that idea that allowing people to care for you is a bad thing. Like we need to encourage it. And again, across the deathbed, there's a lot of people who want to just run screaming from the room, and they're constantly asking, how long is this going to take? And you've got to sort of drill down and find out why they're asking that. Sometimes it's because they can only take 4 days off work, or they've got other things going on, and usually it's because being in this space watching my parent or whoever dying is just, I'm finding this just so confronting that I can't stand it. And so I always try and flip that script and say, look, this person only gets one shot at dying, and this is like sacred time. Whatever sort of religion or spirituality that you have, you don't have to be religious to see that dying time as truly sacred, and to encourage people to sort of just be in that, be your normal selves across the bed, chatting, talking, laughing, remembering what the person who's dying, remembering funny stories about them or how much they mean to that person. And so it's, you're hoping that the person is hearing something, and so they're sort of being accompanied on that journey. They're hearing all these things about themselves, who they were and what they meant to the people that they loved. And then the other part of it is the kind of bonding that can go on around the bedside between the families. You don't get this kind of opportunity very often, to just sit and, we call it vigiling. You just sit in this space with them. It's sacred time, but it's also, you can't recreate it anywhere else. It's unique, and it mustn't ever be rushed through or belittled or invalidated. Mm.
And what do you find with your experience and being with people when they are dying in their final days? What is it that people want?
Mm. Yeah. Gosh, that's a big question. Um,
Yeah, like is there any consistency? I know that you've said that everyone is very unique and everyone's very, individual in their choices and their preferences. But when we come down to our base elements and we're facing death, is there some common threads that you find?
hmm. I would say, just off the top of my head, because I actually haven't thought about that, it would be making sure that the family are all good. People are still thinking about the people in their inner circle and worrying about them. But the dying process, and I use that term deliberately, dying isn't just one moment in time, it's a process. And the body slowly dies. It gradually lets go of things. It is a real letting go of interest in, outside world, politics and whatever else, the news, and then sort of the outer circle of people. You just don't have the capacity or the interest, and so your world gets smaller and smaller. You gradually lose the interest in eating and drinking, and so everything gets sort of quite focused on, I guess, your own symptoms, and making sure that we've got their symptoms under control. And then, I think most of the time people are concerned about how their family's going. But it's interesting that you don't often get those great deathbed confessions or anything. It's not like on the telly a lot of the time.
But that's good to know because not everyone is as connected to the dying process as what you are.
Mm.
So for someone who hasn't experienced that, they're not aware if there is that revelation that we
Yeah,
see, right before you take your last breath.
yeah.
A lot of people don't have the privilege of being in that space when someone does die.
No, and I agree that it is a privilege. It's an incredibly privileged position, and to support other people. So I've worked in hospital and aged care for many years, and now I'm in community palliative care, which means that we support the family and then leave them to it. We're not usually present when the person dies, but it's a great privilege to support family and to empower them to do this for themselves. A lot of people would say, "Oh, I wouldn't know what to do," but when the time comes, they just step up and do it. I think there's been some talk about the basic sort of things when your life is coming to an end. Things like just saying I love you, I'm sorry, forgive me, thank you. Those kind of things become the most important things. And again, in community palliative care, I'm not there all the time for those kind of conversations. I don't see what's going on between the family members. But I know for myself, my own experience, that's what it came down to is, yeah, I love you. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Rose. Can you just explain for people who are unfamiliar with palliative care is when you go into care, generally in a facility when you have a life limiting illness. That's perhaps what some people traditionally think, or that's where you go. Can you talk us through what community palliative care is, what it looks like, what the differences are, just
Mm,
so people can get a broad understanding
yeah.
of just exactly what it is? Because I think there's a lot of misconceptions.
There is, yeah. And we're not going to change the name as much as the push is to do that. So palliative care comes from the Latin word pallare, which means to cloak. And so palliative care kicks in. It can exist alongside treatment. So you don't have to be stopped treatment and be in the last days of your life to get palliative care. The one thing we always want to see as the palliative care team is early referrals. And I think specialists and GPs are getting better at doing that. Now, we can't get too early because there's only a limit to the amount of work that we can accept. But it's great if we can get somebody on the program sort of within the last 12 months or 6 months of life. So look, it's very hard to predict these things, of course. Sometimes we have a general idea, and we've got statistics to back us up to say this is probably what's going to happen based on what you've got wrong with you and what we're looking at. And so palliative care is about living well as you can for as long as you can. And so there's nothing in there about death, is there? So palliative care is about quality of life and improving people's quality of life. And there is even statistics to suggest that getting onto a palliative care program can actually extend your life. And as long as that life extension has good quality, that's the main thing. Because living longer is not the be all and end all. And I think that's one of the things that people tend to make the mistake when they keep on accepting treatment. Oh, you'll get another 3 months. But what does that 3 months actually look like? That's the question that no one asks, or that people don't tend to ask because they're a bit frightened to hear the answer. Like I could say, oh, yeah, I might die in a week if I don't get treatment. But if I get treatment, I can live for another 3 months, and say, oh, well, 3 months is good. But I'll spend that time, 3 days a week getting chemo, feeling sick, having no energy, not being able to go out or meet anybody because I'm too worried about getting infections. I can't go travelling. I can't eat my favourite foods. I can't see all the people I love. So what's the point? What's those 3 months? It's just suffering. 3 months of suffering. And so palliative care comes in. We help you with symptoms. Most palliative care teams have like a social team to support you with counselling. There's support for social supports like allowances and getting access to your super early. If you're diagnosed with a life-limiting illness, you can access your super early. If you're trying to, say, take a big trip or do something special, or even just pay for care or whatever you need that money for. And we also have access to equipment. So it's a total, palliative care is holistic care. So we look at the whole person and say, what is it that is important to you? You tell us, and then we'll try and make that happen. We'll try and put those things in place. What are you worried about? Let's talk about death and dying. What is it? We're the ones that are willing to go there when perhaps no one else is.
It sounds like it's a much more comprehensive service than just somewhere where you go to die, at the end.
Yeah, and community palliative care supports people to die at home. That's what community is. Again, statistically, apparently, I think they say about 75% of people, when asked out of the blue, say they would prefer to die at home, and we're achieving around 20%. So now there's a whole lot of reasons why that doesn't happen. It's not just a failure of the system. Sometimes the care needs of the person are so high that the family can't do it, or that they just don't have, it just doesn't work, doesn't happen. But there's a lot more that we would like to see happen that isn't happening at the moment. And a lot of people say, oh no, I don't want to die at home because I wouldn't want all those memories for that person. And sometimes that needs to be unpacked as well, because we make a lot of assumptions. We sort of go straight, trip over a whole lot of ideas without actually looking at them and saying, No, actually, it would be nice. The family might say, "Well, I want to look after you at home," because it's so much more personal and natural sort of process. So much nicer to die at home than in a hospital. I mean, hospitals are the last place you want to die, in my opinion. It's great, like they do have the capacity to do that, but it's not ideal. You can't get all the people in the room. You can't have people coming and going. Sometimes there's COVID on, so you've got to wear a mask, and it's all that, and you're governed by the staff and how busy they are. And it's not the best place to die, in my opinion. Now, about palliative care, the availability of palliative care, like as an inpatient, if you've got the idea that you don't want to die at home, that you'd like to die in a hospice setting, those settings are pretty few and far between. They're very hard to find. There are palliative care units, dedicated palliative care units. There's only a couple in the state, and a lot of them are more geared towards sort of managing complex symptoms. You might be struggling with an illness, life-limiting illness. You might be still having treatment, but you've got this troublesome symptom or you're really unwell, so they'll put you in a palliative care unit, and you could stay there for 3 days, 2 weeks or whatever it takes, and then you go home. But the idea of just sort of saying, "Oh no, I'd rather go to a hospice to die," that just isn't a thing that's commonly found. So, for example, here, the only place we have for anywhere between Melbourne and the border in Albury is the Mercy Hospice across the border in Albury. And
Yeah, right.
that's a very big area. And if you're wanting to go and die there, but you live in Wangaratta or you live in Benalla, then all your relatives have to go up there and visit you every day. It's just impractical to expect to be able to just be admitted to somewhere to die. Yeah, and that is a real difficulty, which means that we have to plan. We've got to be aware of what's around and what's actually possible for us, instead of just putting our heads in the sand and hoping it'll all work out in the end, and then finding out that no, actually, I'm not getting what I wanted. So the sooner that you can start looking at what the resources are available and knowing what you can do, the better you'll be. Because maybe it is that you're living here wherever you are in a rural area, but you've got lots of relatives in a more sort of urban environment like Melbourne. So you'd say, well, I'd prefer to go there. So I will move myself down there and get connected with all the resources down there. And I've chosen a spot that, there is a palliative care unit that I'd like to go to when the time comes.
It really is all about planning, isn't it?
Yeah, it always is.
And tell me, is community palliative care the same as hospice, home hospice?
This is the difficulty. There's lots of different terms. Um,
Yeah.
Home hospice is usually a private enterprise. So the hospices, there's I think it's about, well, no, I won't say. There's probably 3 or 4, I think, in Victoria, and they are usually partly privately funded. They do get funding from the government, but they have like a source of private funds as well. And so they sort of sit a bit outside the usual system, and they sort of march to the beat of their own drum a little bit too. And they do talk about the postcode lottery in Australia of palliative care, because it depends on where you live, to what you get, what services are available to you, and how much care you can access.
It's great that you brought that up, because it was something that when I interviewed Camilla Rowland from Palliative Care Australia, who's a CEO, when I interviewed her last year, we talked about that. But you're living in a rural area in Wangaratta in northeastern Victoria. What does that look like? What's the impact for you for palliative care there, compared to perhaps what services may be available in the city?
Well, we're a small team. There's only, like, on average, there's like 2 or 3 nurses on every day during the week, and then sometimes when we've got the capacity, we work on the weekends as well. And so we are busy. I don't know how many referrals we get per week, but sometimes it's pretty high. And so we're sort of struggling to keep up with going out and seeing people on the regular. And then we've got to keep juggling the patients that we do have on our books. We've got to keep on checking in with them and making sure that they're okay. And then there's times when we've got to just pivot. Like one day we'll get a call and say, this person wants to go home to die, and they've got, last 72 hours of life or something. And so we have to just bring all of our resources into that space and do a quick turnover of getting someone home, and then supporting the patient, supporting the person's family, getting all the drugs ordered and talking to the GPs and getting the district nurses who do in the rural model generally. Our team are more sort of coordinating care, and the district nurses support our work by going to do regular visits to people who are sort of we deem as stable. Or they may be sort of declining at home, and so the district nurses will do those regular visits, and we just keep in touch with them on the phone and go out less regularly and see them.
And so you're connected, the community palliative care model for you is connected with the local health network that is government funded?
Yeah, we sit with North East Health.
Yeah. And then I would be thinking then that your catchment area would be huge.
That's the thing.
Can you give us an idea for someone who's unfamiliar with that area,
Yeah.
just how large we're talking?
Well, the furthest one away is an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we have the Alpine Valleys, so Bright, Myrtleford and Mount Beauty.
So that's also a hilly area.
Well, actually, no, they're in the foothills. Like
Okay.
so
Yep.
we don't go up the mountain. I
Yep.
think actually we do cover Falls Creek, but I think we've only had one or two people ever in Falls Creek. I guess, and Mount Hotham too. It's fairly rare that we would have somebody dying in those places because they tend to be sort of more holiday sort of areas, and seasonal. The people who live there don't necessarily live there permanently. But the problem with part of it is that we try and provide an on-call service for people. So when it is time that they're in the last days of life and they need more care and the family need care, we like to provide an on-call service so that they can call on somebody if something goes wrong with the medications they're giving or that they just need advice. And we can't provide sort of physical on-call for people down in the Alpine Valleys because it's just too far. It'd be pointless being called up and say, oh, I'll be there in in an hour and a half. And so those people don't get that on-call. They still get the district nurses down there are fantastic. But if someone in those areas is supporting someone to die at home, they're on their own sort of outside of office hours. They do have telephone support. We engage an on-call service to support all of our patients for 24 hours a day. But if they need someone to go out there, there's no one to do that for them, which is, yeah. And it's just because they live too far away from where our service is situated.
So it seems to me, Rose, that when you are in a rural area, it seems even more vitally important that you are doing your planning earlier. You're aware of what
Yes.
resources are available in your local area before you even need them.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that this is why I love the compassionate communities model, which is my passion now is to try and create or to install, I don't know whether install is the right word. So compassionate communities model is something that's, again, an international movement. It's been around for probably 15 years, I think. It was created by a couple of physicians and researchers. One of them is Australian. And they have this vision of a community where everyone knows what to do and everyone wants to help and they know what to do, which is, again, going back to before the funeral industry and medicine took over death and dying and robbed us of agency over it. Everyone did know what to do. We had, like, if someone dies, the kids go out and do the knocking on the doors and say this is what's happened, and then everybody knows. They immediately sort of galvanise into action. They know what to do. They know what's going to be. Oh, we'll get this woman. She knows about laying out the body, and they'll put them in the front room, and the men will go over and dig the grave, and other people will come along with food, and this is just a natural thing. Life and death. This is how it happens. It happens in the community, and we all just sort of, we have our roles or the things we know that need doing. We just do them. And so we've got to sort of like it's a reverse engineering. We have to reclaim this for ourselves because the tsunami's coming. I think they call it a tsunami of death, peak death, they call it.
The grey tsunami.
There's going to be this peak death, which is deaths are going to be increasing constantly over the next 20 years. Palliative care teams can't keep up. and neither they should. There's no need. You don't have to have a palliative care team, or you shouldn't have to, because death is a normal part of life. It's a natural event. It's not a medical event. It's a social event. And if we can somehow re-empower ourselves to take it over and say, yeah, we all know how this works. We know what to do. We know where to find the resources. We know how to support somebody. We know how to talk to people who are nearing the end of life, and we know how to support the person who's supporting that person. We know how to talk to them after the person's died. We know how to manage funerals and home funerals, and it's just talked about, and everybody is comfortable, or to a greater or lesser degree, just accepting that this is what life looks like. And that's why I see the end of life doula role as, in some ways, we're sort of pioneers of the old ways, bringing everybody with it, teaching and empowering the community to say, you've got this, we can do this ourselves. We don't have to always defer to the medical world, or always outsource our afterlife options to a funeral director. There's a lot more options out there than you would think, and you can do it all yourself if you want. You don't have to have a funeral director. And what choices are you making about your body after your body disposal options? Everyone thinks, oh well, it's cremation or burial. I think I'll take cremation because it's better for the environment, which is incorrect. Most of the time, in Australia anyway, it's worse than traditional burial, which usually is a surprise to people. And that there's options like natural burial. There's even now water cremation available. And what is most exciting for me, and I hope I live long enough for it to be established in Australia, is what they call natural organic reduction, or colloquially known as human composting. Now it's legal in some places in the US, and there's plenty of people on the ground in Australia trying to make that happen in Australia, and I really hope that comes into being, because that's what I would prefer. It's the most natural. It actually gives back to the environment, rather than every other option is sort of above the line in terms of the drain on the environment. But natural organic reduction actually sort of goes below the line and starts to give back.
And I think at the moment there's a petition for New South Wales to interest for trials. Yeah, at
That's
the
great.
moment. So yes, it's certainly gaining momentum here in Australia.
Yes.
And it's interesting that you talk about that. I always refer to even our architecture in Australia being a testament to when funerals were in the power of the people at home, because that's the whole reason why we had a parlour in the
Yeah.
front of our house, because that was the room that you laid the body out in,
Yeah.
and everyone would come and pay their respects.
Yeah.
And for me, I remember that it was the most formal room in the house. And as a grandchild, I was never really allowed in there except for on special occasions.
Yes.
And it was where my grandparents kept their lollies in
Yeah.
a glass jar. So that's what I remember it for.
Yeah.
But yeah, even our architecture talks to a time
Mm.
when we did funerals within the home. And it seems, again, it comes back to, you know, knowing people's choices. So again, it comes back a full circle to where we started, Rose, about having conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the time people are carrying around these unexplored biases. And unless we sit down and actually talk about it, we don't actually know for ourselves. If we don't have the opportunity to think about it, or we don't take the time to think about this stuff, it's sort of like, oh God, I never thought of that. Oh yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. And you discover these things as you start to talk about them. But if you never get the opportunity to talk about them, then it's all left as this sort of murky, I don't want to think about it.
And so can you tell me, how did the Good to Go project get together, and what sort of work are you doing within the community up there?
Yeah. So last year, Nicole and I wanted to put on like a Good to Go festival, we call it, which would comprise of, a series of talks and information sessions, a couple of film screenings, and some death cafes. So some events to sort of to raise the profile of this death and dying, and sort of get people talking about it. and to sort of have it was over the space of a month, and it was sort of, I think sometimes you sort of got to do a lot of things in a short space of time to sort of to get people's attention. And we got some funding from the Murray Primary Healthcare Network, which was just fantastic. It was so good to get that money because it enabled us to hire venues, and everything that Nicole and I did was all voluntary. But it was just great to have money to sort of put on different events that we wanted to do. So we learnt quite a bit from that. The first one was our audience was much older than we expected. And that July and August really isn't the time to be doing something like that because it's cold.
It's a bit cold.
Yes, I was thinking, it'll lead up to, Dying to Know Day. It'll be really great. But it's sort of, I realised it's not the right time to be trying to get people out. But from that, we had a little bit of money left over. And then Nicole, being who she is, she's an amazing connector.
And do you want to tell us a little bit about Nicole? Because she's unable to join us today on the
Yes,
call.
yeah.
But she founded End Stage Matters with you, didn't she?
Yes, yeah, back in 2017 or 18, I think. And so she and I have been sort of working together on this work for the last 6-7 years. And we both, she's run a death cafe in Beechworth for the last 3 years. I run one in Wangaratta that I started this year, which is great. And so she knew a few people, and so she was sort of saying, well, let's get them onto the team and let's help. So I think, the more people working together as a team, the better. So we had about 7 or 8 people last year that we'd sort of discovered from various sources, and Nicole had picked up in her travels, who are all passionate about this, as the way we are. And then ever since then, we've just been gradually adding, and now I think we've got about 18 or 19 people in the collective, which was what our original vision was for End Stage Matters, was to create like a doula hub, because I think it's good for doulas to work together so that there's a team of people that can provide various services and supports for people, because a lot of the time doulas have different focus. So mine, I've got all this nursing background, and even though if I was in there as a doula, I wouldn't be providing any nursing or medical advice or anything. I've still got that experience, but whereas other people have more of an interest in, say, getting advanced care plans or wills and things sorted out and help and supporting you that way. Other people might say, well, I just want to sort of sit vigil with people when they're nearing the end of life, or I've got counselling skills and I can help you with that. So if we had a doula hub, then it means that people can go in with their particular skill set and meet that person where they need them. And also, if I'm busy or I'm working or something, then and they need a doula, then someone else can go out. And we also had the idea of having on our, not so much on our books, but people who we could recommend, so like physios or here's a good GP or whatever it is that people are trying to access. We could be that hub, that one-stop shop. But we both ended up with fairly busy jobs, and so that side of things didn't eventuate. But now with the Good to Go collective, it's feeling like this has got momentum, and that we're all sort of really keen on pushing forward our tagline, which is reshaping the narrative around death, dying, grief and loss. So this year we have decided to just offer different events through the year instead of just all concentrating in one particular spot on the calendar. So we had the Good to Go Expo in 2 different venues at the end of May. And we have regular death cafes around the area. We've got a website, which is, I'll push it now, G2G. So the letter G, the number 2, and the letter G, project.com.au.
And we'll include that link in the show notes as well, so people can go through that. Yeah. But it sounds like a very good model when you work as a collective, especially in a rural area with some of the challenges that you were talking through earlier with resourcing and distance. And it sounds like it's just a very practical way in which to ensure that none of you burn out and you support each other.
And I think just the idea of the doula, it is gaining momentum. It's difficult because it's not funded by anything, so people have to pay, the full price. You can't claim it in any sort of health insurance, and the government isn't recognising doulas as yet, even in the packages and things, which is disappointing, because statistically they say that for someone dying at home, or even with approaching end of life at home, they will spend the most an hour out of every day with some kind of health professional, and the rest of the time you're on your own, either with your family or on your own. And that's as much as the formal supports can offer you, really. And so what are you doing with the rest of that time? And given sort of how poorly we understand death and dying, really, and the lack of literacy around that, I think death doulas provide this great service in the gaps there for people. There's a lot of people wandering around not knowing what they can access, and not having anyone to talk to, and feeling unsupported.
And it is challenging, even speaking, from my experience when our friend died, to find everything is a real challenge. And you're also generally suffering some sort of trauma if it's
Mm,
unexpected, or, even if you've been diagnosed with a life limiting illness, you're not in the headspace
no.
to actually navigate a healthcare system. And
Mm,
then if you have the added challenge of being in a rural area,
yeah.
yeah, it can be quite complicated. And so I really appreciate you talking through that sort of challenge and the fact that doulas aren't recognised at the moment, because obviously
Mm,
that's a space that, as we age, with our grey tsunami, and all those baby boomers end up getting older and needing care, it will actually be their children and their loved ones that will be responsible for providing that care.
mm.
And that example really gave us a snapshot of what we can expect to see coming and what our roles might be moving forward.
Yeah, yeah. And we know how challenging it is, for this so-called sandwich generation, even now, struggling. I would say probably Nicole's right in the middle of that now. Her partner's mother has just died, but she's been in care with dementia for several years. And so, there's the burden of, oh, not that much burden, but there's the, having to sort of care for her and support her. And now her own parents are requiring a bit of support, and Nicole's the one that's sort of having to step into the breach, and she's got children who are having children of their own, and so she's sort of being pulled. And that's part of the reason why she's not here today, is that, yeah, she's busy trying to juggle all those things. So she's a living example of the pressures that the sandwich generation is under.
And I think that's a really good example. And thanks for using, that example. I'm sure Nicole won't mind. And given the fact that that is what we are facing, and it's the statistics that it is in the process of shifting there now, how can we start conversations with our loved ones about this? Whether it's the person who, such as myself, with a mother who's 86 and a son who's 21, how can we start? Because I'm referred to what is the sandwich generation, being stuck in between those two.
Mm.
So how do we have conversations with our loved ones? How do we initiate them, Rose?
I think if you always put it in terms of it being a loving act, whatever you're doing, whatever you're trying to do is coming from love and concern, whether it be a child talking, like a grown child talking to their elderly parents about wanting to sort of know what their wishes are, and saying, I'm saying this because I love you and I don't want to make the wrong decision. And if it's the parents trying to talk to their grown children, saying, I want to give you this gift. I don't want you to end up being in a place where you don't know what to say or do. What would happen if you had to speak for me? What would you say? And saying, I'm trying to do this out of love. And yeah, and I guess referencing, the worst case scenario. What's the worst thing that can happen if we don't do this? And if you have to, you can push that that barrow and say, there's awful situations where people have been left with having to live with the burden of the decision they had to make for the rest of their lives. And when you carry that kind of guilt or burden around with you, it makes you even more afraid of your own death. Or yeah, it just messes with you.
Yeah, the ripple effect is
Yeah,
quite significant, isn't
huge.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. All
Mm.
because we're too scared to have a conversation.
Yeah, about the only thing we know is going to happen.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Look, I I can't thank you enough for being with us today, Rose, and please give my very best to Nicole.
I will. I will.
and we will make sure that we pop those links so people can certainly find the support that they need, at least around the Wangaratta, northeast Victoria area. But thank you so much for spending time with us today and giving us a few hints on how we can actually have conversations.
That's an absolute pleasure. You know, I could talk about this stuff all day. So no drama for me. I love it.
Well, thank you, Rose. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Catherine.
Don't be caught dead forgetting to subscribe. And here are some more videos we know you'll love.